Last week we saw how Laban tricked Jacob into marrying Leah, and then he got another 7 years of labor to marry Rachel, the wife he wanted in the first place. But Leah had 4 sons quickly, and Rachel had none. This chapter we will see Rachel get jealous of her sister and start to follow in her family's mistakes in the past by allowing Jacob to have her slave as a concubine. This is so pitiful in the middle that it's almost humorous. But these 2 sisters are vying for the same husband. And of course, God doesn't approve of 2 wives. But in this case, he was tricked into marrying one he didn't want. And then I think the one that he didn't want was the one that God wanted him to have, because she had children. She's already had 4 last week, and now she's about to get more. Okay? Verse 1. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." One of the things that kind of fascinated me, this was my own impression, was you read, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness." We know you're not lying, and we know you don't worship idols and all that. But it got down to number 10 and it said, "Don't envy your neighbor, anything your neighbor has." And I said, that just doesn't seem to be at the level that you would put in the 10 commandments, the top 10. But we've seen that envy and jealousy has started wars. It's started more trouble than you can shake a stick at. And so here's 2 sisters in the same family married to the same man, and they're envying each other because one of them can have children and the other one can't.
This is just Genesis.
This is just Genesis, right? Well, the first murder. One of them accepted the sacrifice, the other one didn't. Okay. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel. Okay, wait a minute, I left something out. She told Jacob, "Give me children lest I die." So she is saying, "I want children from you or I'm going to die." And he's done given Leah like 4 kids. So it ain't him.
Sure.
So she's the one griping at Jacob, and it ain't Jacob's problem. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel. And he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So she said, "Here is my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her." So she's doing the same thing Sarah did. She's given up. It's already been 4 or 5 years and no kids, so she said, "Here, take my slave, and I'll claim her child as my child." Then he gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he also has heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. So this is kind of a weird way of looking at things, but she thinks that by her maid having a son by her husband, that's her child, and now God has judged my case and everything is copacetic. Dan, we're going to learn later, was not good. Okay? But this is one of the tribes of Israel. I was going to say that studying these tribes is very hard. It's kind of above my pay grade a little bit. And we're going to find some of it's confusing, because the 12 tribes are mentioned at least 20 times in the Bible. And each time they leave out a name or change a name or change the order of the names. And it means something each time, but I'm not sure what it is. So it's kind of strange that way. But it gives y'all something to look at when you're doing your homework and reading this, to pay attention to the names and what order they're listed in, and what name was left out and what name was added in. We'll get to that at the very last. First of all, I wanted to point out that Rachel envied her sister. We know later God chose to include envy and jealousy in the 10th commandment, as the 10th commandment. So we can see that the judgment of God looks at Rachel as sinning by coveting what her sister could do, having children, versus her having Jacob's heart. She had Jacob's heart. Jacob loved Rachel. That was his love of his life, and he loved her, but she wanted children by him. and couldn't have it. And Leah was the one that couldn't get his heart. He didn't want her. He didn't love her like he did Rachel, but she had all the kids. So he was looking at the outward appearance of Rachel instead of inwardly to her being a good woman. God knows that Rachel's heart condition will prove trouble is coming with her attitude. So she makes the same mistake Sarah made with Hagar by giving Bilhah as concubine to Jacob. The name Dan means God hath judged me. Okay? That could be good or bad. Okay? Could God be judging her and saying, I have other plans for you, and you need to calm down?
Right.
And he is waiting for her attitude to change before he gives her a child. But we'll get into that. It's going to get worse instead of better. Okay? Right here I wanted to make a point about having multiple wives. God made it clear in early Genesis that marriage was between one man and one woman, and they become one flesh. Not 3, 4, 5, or 6, and certainly not 2 men or 2 women.
Right.
People have a tendency to say, well, it's in the Bible, so it must be okay. There's whole religions that are built on it's in the Bible. That proves that God wanted this. You can't have bigamy and multiple wives as the Mormons did. The Mormons had to...
The Mormons do.
Yeah. Well, the Mormons had to conform to our laws, but secretly they want as many wives as they can get. You won't find anywhere in Scripture that God blesses multiple wives. There's trouble in each one of these marriages. Sarah made the decision for Abraham to have Hagar. He later took at least another concubine in his later years. But the Bible just reports that that happened, not putting God's blessing on it. In other words, Abraham is the father of the faith, and you would think that he would have everything the way it's supposed to be. But before he was made the patriarch of the family, he took Hagar. And after Sarah died, he took another wife, which is legal. Okay? But see, it wasn't really a wife, it was still a concubine. And it may be just to keep you warm on cold nights, I don't know. Now we see Rachel and later Leah allow Jacob to take their maids as wives. God never said this was in his plan. We will find many things in Scripture that actually happened, but God didn't bless. Man, there's liars and murderers and everything you can imagine in the Bible. So you can't just come up and say, well, it's in the Bible, so it's okay. We have to look at what he blesses and what he says is good, and pay attention to those things. And what we have the stories for is to show that these were regular people. They have the same foibles and sins that we have, and you can see what God's action was in their life. Okay. There are whole denominations that have relied on the patriarchs having multiple wives as the pattern for their excuse for bigamy. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which cheapens a God-sanctioned marriage to the point of a joke. Using the scriptural crutch, marriage has been reduced to just about whatever combination that man can think of. And soon it will be marrying robots and animals.
And there's still the children.
Yeah. Later, the tribe of Dan will be made judges over Israel, Samson being one of them. But then they start a slide towards idol worship, and lots of trouble ensues. So we hear these stories about Samson and these different stories about what's going on, and we think that whatever Solomon did was good, and whatever Samson did was good. Well, God used them, but see, his problem was with women. And Solomon's problem was with women. Solomon asked for all the wisdom that God could give him, and he started out good, but he ended up terrible. Actually, pretty bad. And nobody ever mentions that. They'll talk about how wise Solomon was and good he was. Also, backing up to verse 3, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her, is an idiom used back then. That means if another woman has a child and I put that child on my lap, the child will be mine. It is a legal claim on a servant's children. Bilhah may have very well had children of her own. But if the master of the slave claims the child, it's now hers. Rachel was not obligated to accept the child produced, even if the child came from Jacob, but could do so. So I wanted to explain that when they say, I will put her on my knee, or she will have a child on my knees. Let's say the child came out and was not perfect. She could turn it down. Okay? Let's say the child was a girl. She could turn it down. So when a son came out and it was perfectly fine, she put the child on her knees, and Bilhah just lost her child. Because now the servant's child becomes the owner's child. Okay? And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali. Now, she hasn't done anything but give a slave girl to her husband. But she is thinking, I'm catching up with my sister, you know. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, this is after the fourth child, she stopped bearing children. She took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. So she's already 4, and she's got 2 by another servant. And she's saying, I'm not going to let her catch him. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad, which means a troop or an army. So now she's got 5. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore another Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher. So now she's had 2 by her maid, so that's 6 now. Then she's counted on her side.
Jacob's a busy man.
Yeah. We're going to see later that he is it must be a calendar thing, but they're trading. He's going to get some mandrakes here in a minute, and they're going to trade off and say, you can sleep with him tonight if I can have the mandrakes. So now we're looking at sisters in mortal combat over who could produce the most children for Jacob through surrogates. Leah had stopped bearing, and Rachel never could. Naphtali means wrestling, or my struggle. Gad means a troop or an army. Remember, Leah had already given Jacob 4 sons, yet felt it necessary to give Jacob her maid to keep her childbearing going. It fascinates me to see how these women think giving another woman to their husband makes their servants' children their children. The next child from Leah's maid is named Asher, which means happy. Verse 14. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field. Reuben is the youngest. He's the firstborn. Or the oldest, I should say. And brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, listen to how tacky this is. Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?
What are mandrakes?
They're a plant that is thought to be an aphrodisiac. Okay.
Oh.
So
Mushrooms are aphrodisiac too.
Reuben probably was hearing his mother gripe and said, I want to help mom out. So he went and found her some mandrakes and brought them home. And Rachel said, therefore I will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrake. And Rachel said, yeah, he will lie with you tonight. So she is telling Leah that if you'll give me your son's mandrakes, then you can have him tonight. That's pitiful to me. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. So he didn't even have a choice. It's like, you're bought and paid for it, you know.
Really?
And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. So she had stopped conceiving, and now she's conceiving again. With no mandrakes, by the way. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a 6th son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulon. She is saying, when is Jacob going to love me instead of Rachel? Look at all that I have given him. And how many women do you see today? I want to have a child so my husband will love me. And you have to stay with me. The husband leaves and pays the child.
Girls do that.
Yeah.
Young names.
Yeah. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. So that's
What is it?
Dinah,
Dinah.
like dinosaur. Well, we're going to find out about her later. They never mention girls. So when you have a woman mentioned, you need to make a note of it, because later you're going to find out some story that's going to be told about her. And she became very important later. Mandrakes were thought to be an aphrodisiac in that day and are even mentioned in the Song of Songs. Reuben, apparently hearing his mother griping about how Jacob loved Rachel more than his mom, brought some to his mom. Rachel saw this and asked for them. Rachel made a deal with Leah that Leah would sleep with Jacob using Rachel's turn for the mandrakes. In verse 17 it says God listened to Leah and she conceived again. Here again we see God has favor on Leah and she gives God praise each time. See, this is what you don't hear from Rachel. You hear it from Leah. Each time she gives God the glory. So she is a different type of woman. Okay? What she wants is a loving husband who refuses to love her. He keeps running back to Rachel. Okay? Issachar means my wages. Or in other words, I paid for this. Next, Leah has Zebulon, which means to dwell. She is still longing for Jacob to live with her because she has borne him 6 sons. The dysfunction in this family is so thick you can cut it with a knife. Then Leah bore a daughter to Jacob and named her Dinah. Girls are not treated the same way sons are in this time. It's possible that Jacob produced more daughters with the concubines, but they aren't mentioned, probably because Leah and Rachel didn't want them. It is clear Scripture is documenting the birth of the 12 tribes of Israel, and women weren't part of that. Dinah was mentioned, in my humble opinion, because she would become part of the story later. 30:22. Now, how many kids is this? Is this 6 or 7, 8 kids?
She made 7.
Right.
Dinah made 7, I think.
8 or 9.
Yeah, so it's been quite a while now. Rachel is fixing to score. Verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. Now this is kind of a play on words. The Hebrew word for taken away is Yesef. It's with an E. Yosef means you're added. So you can take away and add, and it's kind of a pun. So she named him Joseph because of adding. And it says that God has taken away my reproach. So God has forgiven her, or whatever it is over with now. And she has her first son, and his name is Joseph. Okay? Now we hear a familiar refrain found all throughout the Bible. Then God remembered Rachel. You're going to hear this a lot. God remembered somebody. He has never forgot. He knows everything about you. But it just seems like that God is not acting on their behalf. And then he says, oh, by the way, my people are in slavery down here for 400 years. Well, God remembered them, you know. So, you're going to hear this a lot in there. Of course, God has never forgotten Rachel, but he made her wait for his time. He felt she had suffered enough. Now, I hope that we let that kind of sink in a minute, and God has a time. And we try to rush it to the point of giving women to our husbands, you know. We do all kinds of crazy things to try to get God to do what we want instead of waiting on God. The good stuff comes when God comes.
Yeah.
And we can't we'll do something and then ask God to bless it.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to bless it, okay? He let me see miracles to build my faith.
I think
Simple things.
Yeah.
I lost my keys one time over her parents' place, and it was fall, and the leaves were absolutely this deep. And I knew they were somewhere from the front porch to the driveway, which is probably 60 feet, 70 feet. But I had no idea where I had walked. And I prayed to God that He would show me my keys. And I walked over and just stuck around, and there's my keys. Now that may not mean much to y'all. Well, you probably saw a place. No, I didn't see it. I went down and put my hand there, and the keys were there, in the leaves. And all kinds of things. I could go on with miracles. He let me work for a solid week on my car, on my truck, that blue truck out there. I wanted to change the plugs in it because I felt sorry for it. I bought the truck new and I never changed the plugs. It had like 50,000 miles on it or something. I never changed the plugs on it. Wasn't even missing, but I just felt like, give it a break. So I went down and bought some spark plugs, and they were hard to get out. Man, it fought me the whole way. Now, I kind of feel like I'm a shade tree mechanic. I built cars and raced them and did all this stuff when I was young. Still do it today. I work on everything myself. Well, when I got the new spark plug, every one of them fought me out. Man, it was hard to work. I was wore out just trying to get them out. Well, my dad taught me that when you screw in a spark plug as far as you can go, and then you put the wrench on it. So I screwed it in as far as I could go, and I put the wrench on it, and it stripped out. And the spark plug fell out on the ground. So I picked it up again, and I worked it in there, and I turned it, got it as far as I could go. I sprayed it with WD-40 and all kinds of stuff, tried to clean up the threads and all kinds of stuff. Wouldn't work. And so finally, it took me a couple of days, but I got all the plugs in except for number one. The first one I started with, it wouldn't go in. So I went down and bought a thread chaser. You know what that is. It's very hard carbon steel, and it's not like it's cutting threads, but it's going to straighten out whatever's booked.
Right.
And so I said, Lord, if this doesn't work, I'm gonna have to pull a head off or put a helicoil in or something. I don't know exactly what I'm gonna have to do. So I put that thing in there and I screwed it in as far as I could go, and I made it. It felt like it was gonna go. Oh man, I was about to throw up then, So anyway, I just prayed. I said, Lord, I can't do this without you, and I don't know what's wrong. I've done all I can do. And so I put that spark plug in and screwed it in. It went all the way up there. I put about a quarter turn on it and it was done. He was showing me that I can't do anything, nothing, without Him. So it's kind of humbling to know that all of your skills are for naught. All the things that you've learned doesn't necessarily have to work until He approves it.
Right.
So He was teaching me things all through my walk with Christ that I'm supposed to pray every day, all the time, for everything. You keep thinking, well, I shouldn't have to pray to put in spark plugs. But you do. And of course, she's done the same thing. I was out there busting my knuckles on the lawnmower, trying to change the blade out. And I had rounded off one of the bolts that goes up and holds the blade on underneath. It gets a little rusty, and the grass will round the corners, and it's not quite fitting the wrench like it used to. So I put my wrench on it and it rounded it off, of course. And it kept getting worse and worse. Then I got some clamp-ons, to try to get it to clamp on. That wouldn't work. So she came out there to check on me. I told her what all was going on, and I said, well, I got one more wrench and I'm going to try in there, and it's a good wrench. It's got good corners on it and everything. I said, but after that, I don't know, I have to cut it off and, drill it out or something. So she laid her hands on the mower, and I came back and I put it on there, undid it, came right out. So, like I said, I'll tell you another story. I know y'all getting tired of this, but this back air conditioner has been flat for 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah, 6,
Really?
7.
Yeah. Bought a window unit back there, and I just knew that I was going to have to buy a new air conditioner, $3,000 or $4,000, which I don't have.
Right.
And so I had discovered this stop leak stuff, and it worked on this air conditioner. So I went ahead and bought some more, and I said, yeah, but this thing's been flat for 5 years. Air, moisture,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. And so I went out there and I prayed before I ever touched it. I said, Lord, if it's your will, I pray that you would help me get this air conditioner going.
Right.
And I prayed that this would work. And it's still working.
Awesome.
After 5 or 6 years
And
of
we've
being
been
flat.
no air back there.
Yeah, we've been no air forever. And I knew it was going to cost me $4 or $5 grand, to get it fixed.
God's good.
So
Amen. He's so good.
I just believe that he'll make things happen if you keep praying. Okay? All right, where am I at? Okay, after all these years giving her husband another woman,
Yeah.
watching the family expand, nothing of her own, God gave her a child from Jacob. She named him Joseph, which means God has taken away my reproach. This will be very important in coming chapters of Genesis. Joseph will be a type of Christ, as we will see. Another strange thing is that there was never a tribe of Joseph. So when you start looking at these tribes, and I named them on the back page, as he went to Egypt, another strange thing is that there's no tribe of Joseph as he went to Egypt. The tribes coming from Joseph were from a marriage to a Gentile bride. I should have underlined that. In Egypt. Ring any bells? Joseph also means adding, so we are added to the tribes of Israel by marriage. Do we all understand what the
Joseph
inference?
means what?
Adding.
Adding?
Adding, yeah.
That's what we are.
That's the point I wanted to make, is that Joseph was taken from his brothers and became an Egyptian, which is of the world, a Gentile, married a Gentile, had 2 children by this woman, and Jacob adopted them. Manasseh and Ephraim are adopted children by Jacob. So when we get into the study of Joseph, you're going to see time and time and time and time it's about Jesus. He is a picture, perfect example of what Jesus did. The tribes coming from Joseph were from a marriage to a Gentile bride in Egypt. Ring any bells? Joseph also means adding, so we are added to the tribes of Israel by marriage. I wanted to make that point, that we are part of Abraham's family. We have been added in. We have been adopted in to their family. And everybody says, no, I'm a Christian and they're Jews. Stop thinking that way. Abraham is the key to all of this. All of these promises that we've been reading about are through him, his seed. So when we're adopted in, we become one of them, not them being cut out. And so many people want to cut the Jews out and then make us separate. And I'm like, no, I want to be with them, because that's the key. When the apostles found out that the Gentiles were added in, they got it. Because they had been reading the same scriptures all these years, but what they focused on was don't marry outside the tribe.
Yeah.
In other words, you don't take a Gentile wife. You don't do that. You don't take a pagan or anything like that. So there was all of these things going on that they wouldn't even eat with a Gentile. They wouldn't speak to a Gentile. So they were very prejudiced against that. But when they found out that Jesus came for us all, and the better covenant was for everyone. We are joining the Abrahamic covenant, but it's the Jesus covenant now, because he has added us in. And Joseph is a type of Jesus. So you're going to see that we've been adopted, we've been added. All of these things start to come together when you see the big picture. Notice the prophecy of verse 23 and 24. God has taken away her reproach, which Jesus did, and Joseph did for her. Speaks of Jesus taking away our sins away, as Joseph was taken into Egypt out of the promised land. Jesus came to this world. He came out of the promised land, which is heaven, and came to this world. Then in verse 24, we'll add to her another son. Just as Joseph was taken and then added back in, Jesus would be taken and then added back in. Jacob the father thought Joseph had died. We hadn't got there yet. But this is the coat of many colors. And they brought it back with blood all over it and said that he had died. but then found he was still alive. He was alive again in the end. Joseph was the son that Jacob loved. You remember? Joseph was the one that Jacob
So
loved.
Joseph was Jacob's son?
Yeah, Joseph was Jacob's son from Rachel, the woman that he loved. Okay? And he lost him only to find out he was still alive. So in 2 verses we have taken away and added back in. Does this apply to us? We have been added back in. Okay? All of Jacob's sons would be born out of the promised land while Jacob was still in bondage servitude to Laban. You got to kind of back off and look at that as a picture. He is in bondage servitude, and all the tribes of Israel were born out of the promised land. Benjamin would be born later in Canaan, and Rachel would die in childbirth in chapter 35. So Rachel's going to have one more kid. It's going to be Benjamin.
And she
That's the
died
baby.
with him.
Yeah, she died having the baby.
So Rachel was able to have her own children then?
2. Joseph and,
Joseph.
and Benjamin.
So, Joseph was the son that Jacob loved.
When we get there, all these brothers are going to be arguing because they hate Joseph.
So if Rachel would have just waited for the children God wanted her to have, it's like, man,
So
Yeah.
all these other children are from
handmaidens or
Not all of them. The first 4 were from Leah.
Leah.
Leah, yeah.
You'll
But-
see in the story though,
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get it all in Bible studies an hour a week. But if you kind of already have read the story, you start seeing how things are fitting together. And Jacob loved Joseph. That was his favorite son out of all of them because it came from Rachel.
Right.
Okay, so you had Reuben and all of these other sons are plotting against Joseph, and so they throw him in a pit and then sell him as a slave to people going to Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Which is the world, okay?
So
We won't wait on God.
We're so bad.
We will not wait on God. We want to force the issue and then wonder why God didn't bless it and things turn out rotten and everything. And that's what I'm saying is because it's in the Bible doesn't make it His blessing. He has a way of doing things and we need to pay attention to that. And it's sort of like learning. You know, after a while, after being a Christian for 50 or 60 years, you might learn something. But we, as humans, we're fleshly and we want what we want, you know.
Right.
So we push the issue.
I
So
like
I'm
that
hoping that we can
I like
kind of
that
see that the study of Joseph, I don't know, it may be three or 4 chapters, I don't even know how many it'll be, but it's going to be one thing after another
Yeah.
of showing Christ through Joseph. And it's going to be a little harder for me because I got another source I'm going to use. I'm going to use the rabbis that I'm going, but I've got another guy that wrote a real good thing on Joseph's life and what he did. And it talks about his destiny. We need to understand that we have a destiny, just like these people have a destiny.
Right.
And your life will be successful if we go after God's destiny for us. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country." So he's wanting to get out of there. He's paid his dues, he thinks, for his wives. And I said, I want to have my own life. So he wants to get out of Mama's basement. You know, he's like 101 years old at least. Probably 110 more like him. And he's wanting to go live his life like he wants to live it. "Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you." And Laban said to him, "Please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake." Now this may sound like Laban is a believer. No, he's an idol worshiper, but he believes in spirits, so he believes that Jacob's God is blessing Jacob, and he has been able to partake in it. Now you would think I would want Jacob's God, but no, he's going to keep his gods, but he's just adding another God into his pile of idols.
He's a salesman.
Yeah, exactly. Then he said, "Name your wages and I will give it." Because when he got there, he didn't have many sheep or many animals, and now it's grown quite a bit. So Jacob said to him, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you have had before I was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now, when shall I also provide for my own house? So he is saying, I've given you enough. Look at all you've got now. Just let me go. Now Jacob feels like he has served Laban well, and it's time for him to go out on his own. I don't want to get into a bunch of speculation, but if Jacob arrived in Haran at about 87, he has now served at least 14 more years, and probably more. He almost has to be over 101, and Laban is about to make him stay longer. Laban is a pagan idol worshiper. Verse 27 makes him sound like he's a believer, but he really believes in spirits, and God is just another spirit to him. He freely admits that Jacob has pleased his God to the benefit of Laban. Laban needs Jacob's help because he is much older than Jacob, and Laban's sons later complain about Jacob stealing all of Laban's wealth. Now, if you'll remember, when Abraham sent for Isaac a wife with the Holy Spirit. I don't think you were here. You missed the best one of all.
Sorry.
Well, he sent
You're lost.
a servant. He sent a servant to Haran to pick up a wife for him and Laban's sister. Laban was alive when Isaac got married. So Laban's pretty old now, because Isaac's son is now 100 years old now. Okay? That's the point I wanted to make, was how old Laban had to be. So his sons had to be running the show. He was probably just the patriarch of the family and telling people what to do. So he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you do this for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. So he's making up a deal, and of course Jacob is a trickster. He is a supplanter, and he's got his own plan he's been thinking up for a while. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all of the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So he's saying, let me separate all the speckled and stripes and stuff out, and they'll be mine, and I will separate them away, and we won't mix flocks anymore. And whatever I have, and whatever you have, you have. But he wants him to keep feeding his flocks.
Right.
So he's going to have his own flocks, but he's also going to do Laban's flocks. Okay. Let's see. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen if it's with me. In other words, I only want the speckled ones. So if you find one that's a solid color in mine, it's stolen. You can have it. So he's making a deal with it. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. And we need to kind of pay attention to how he said that. In other words, for some reason, Laban wanted all solid colored animals. We're fixing to find out. Now Laban is asking what would be fair for him to give Jacob for all the years of service he gave Laban, and Jacob came up with an ingenious plan to claim what he felt was he was owed. One thing Laban knew after all these years was Laban didn't like, I should have put Jacob, one thing Jacob knew after all these years was Laban didn't like spotted and striped animals. Laban in Hebrew means white. So apparently he would look out there and see the speckled animals, and he would gripe and say, I wish they were all white. He wants to see all white sheep and all brown goats, or whatever color, black goats maybe, or whatever, brown cattle. He doesn't like...
It was a racist.
Yeah, well, whatever it was, but Laban means white. So it was sort of a tick with him. You know, like, I want perfect looking animals out there. And he didn't think the speckled ones looked perfect. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all of the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that has some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. Now his sons was Jacob's sons. So the speckled ones went with Reuben and them, and the other ones stayed over here in his block. Verse 36. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. So now they're 3 days apart. Jacob's flocks is 3 days away, and Laban's flocks is over here. So he moves back and forth to take care of them. Okay? So Jacob separated out the lambs and the goats that he wanted and moved them 3 days' journey between his and Laban's animals. It's about 50 years or so since I had biology classes, but I believe if you have spotted a mom and a spotted dad, the chances of having a spotted child are pretty great. There may be a recessive gene in there that brings a solid color, but with mom and dad both spotted, probably not. So what would make a solid white sheep come out of 2 spotted ones? Not very much, genetically speaking. It would be like a mom and dad having a blue-eyed child and both having brown eyes. Maybe somewhere back around grandma and grandpa, a blue-eyed gene may be present, but that would be rare outcome from 2 brown-eyed people. 37. Now Jacob took for himself rods of grain. I want to first put a rider on this. This makes no sense to me, and I don't have a good explanation for it. I believe that God revealed something to Jacob, and he is going through with the plan. If God tells you to do something, no matter how silly it is, I think you should do it. Now, other people have said, well, it was a superstition. Other people have even said that it works. I don't know. I don't see how you can prove that this works. But what he's doing is he's going to take sticks from trees, poplar and almond and chestnut. They all have dark bark. And he takes a knife and skins it, and it's got white underneath. So he's making spots on this stick. And he's going to stand it up in front of the goats while they're mating, and they'll have spotted children. Now, that's all I'm going to say about it, because there's no scientific thing that I can find on that. I think it's a superstition, or God told him to do it. And I believe that's what, I believe God revealed it to him. Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and of chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. I don't know what would make them want to, unless there's something in the water, you know, but apparently there was a lot of stuff going on at the watering trough. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streak and all the brown in the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flocks. So now he's getting some of Laban's by doing the same thing to his flocks. Okay? And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters. He could have a real strong sheep that was all white, but then he puts the rods in front of them and a speckled one comes out. Okay? Because they were strong. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. I don't know how to explain the verses in 37 through 41. This was either a superstition or a supernatural revelation revealed to Jacob. Either way, Jacob was blessed by God. I don't know what it was in the water that would make them conceive when they came to get water. I can't explain why staring at a spotted stick while mating would produce more spotted kids. I choose to believe it's a supernatural to be able to bless Jacob. Jacob allows the weaker animals to mate, and the strongers were Jacob. Any explanation caused Jacob's flocks to become great and Laban's to dwindle. So whatever the explanation is, it worked. And that's the main point of the story. I believe it has to do with supernatural revelation to Jacob. When God tells you to do something, it may sound stupid, but you'll always be blessed and witness a miracle when you do it. We have learned that Jacob loved Rachel but had no children for a long time. Her only son at this time was Joseph. Joseph, we will find out later, was sold into slavery and taken to Egypt, or the world. While there, Joseph marries a Gentile bride and has 2 children, Manasseh and Ephraim. These 2 children were adopted by Jacob into the family. The counting of the tribes of Israel has always been difficult. There were 12 children from Jacob, but Joseph's wasn't counted. Joseph's children, Manasseh and Ephraim, were counted in the count. So we end up with 13 names with Benjamin. Or a baker's dozen, however you want to look at it. Now, did this print out on y'all's? Okay. Okay. Because it's real hard to do this. I started just to write it.
Some of the spacing is wrong, but
Let's write on mine.
I know. It's him.
Okay. So we see Zilpah had Gad and Asher. And Leah had Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. So counting on Leah's side, we got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 kids on her side. Well, Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin. Okay, so that's 8, 9, 10. And over here on Bilhah, we got Dan and Naphtali. So we have 12. But see, Joseph isn't counted, but Manasseh and Ephraim are counted in. So subtract 1 would be 11, 12, 13. You see how I got that? On Ephraim and Manasseh. Now all through this you're going to see 13, but they only list 12. So they leave somebody out.
Manasseh?
Joseph had Manasseh and Ephraim in Egypt. So whatever happens here, Joseph never really had a tribe, but we count his 2 sons, and you're going to find Dan is left out a lot. And I wanted to show you this. Let me say this. This is the list of Jacob's children that form the 12 tribes. Now let's go to Revelation. Now, like I said, these tribes are mentioned all throughout the Bible in different places. You're going to find them in Exodus, you'll find them in Deuteronomy and Numbers and all through. But I figured the best place to go would be the last Mohican, to be Revelation, because that's where we have the 144,000. Okay? 7:4, Revelation. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000. Of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of the tribe of Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Gad, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Asher, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 were sealed. See, now we're looking at Manasseh and not Joseph, okay? Of the tribe of Simeon, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Levi, 12,000 were sealed. Of the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 were sealed. Sometimes they leave out Levi because he was the tribe of priests. And they didn't fight and didn't participate in anything but priestly duties. Of the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 were sealed. And now I've got it underlined in bold writing. Of the tribe of Joseph, 12,000 were sealed. They didn't even want to say Ephraim's name.
Really?
That's how bad he was. Okay? Of the tribe of Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. Now, I thought of something today in a Sunday school class. What if they mentioned the tribe of Joseph as being a Gentile tribe? Because of all the symbolism.
It's finna get bad.
What?
Storm.
That would be us, child of Joseph.
That's right.
Storm.
Why would they, if you look at all, there's no tribes of Joseph anywhere except in Revelation. And it says, and they mention Manasseh's name, okay, which is one of his sons. They left Ephraim completely out.
Yeah.
Dan is nowhere to be seen. You don't see Dan in there anywhere, in those people. So Dan's been left out, and he won't mention Ephraim's name. Now, he may have picked 12,000 of Ephraim, but I thought it was weird that he put the tribe of Joseph. And if Joseph is a type and shadow of Christ, They could be Gentile tribes. I'm just throwing that out there because I can't teach what I don't know and I can't prove in Scripture. I just thought that was interesting and it came to me this morning while I was teaching.
Right.
Okay, the tribes were listed at least 20 times in Scripture, but looking at Revelation is probably the most meaningful. Many of the lists are in different order. I noticed that they weren't necessarily in birth order. And some names are added and left out depending on the scope of the Scripture. I'm sure there were reasons why they were listed the way they were, wherever you read them at. I'm just not there yet, and I don't know why, and I'll have to study up on it. Notice in verse 8, the tribe of Joseph is used instead of Ephraim. Dan and Ephraim are shifted around because of their idol worship. There never was a tribe of Joseph, but God wrote his name instead of Ephraim and left Dan completely out, substituting Manasseh instead.
Right.
Next week we'll see Jacob leave Laban, and it won't be on good terms.